So good morning, everybody. Thanks very much for joining us for this panel presentation on closing the digital divide, opportunities and challenges. I'm Professor Sharon Collard from the University of Bristol, and I'm joined today by my co-chair, Professor Julie McLevy, also from the University of Bristol. So COVID-19 has really highlighted the importance of digital connection, as I'm sure we'll all agree, in ensuring that adults and children are educationally, economically, socially and financially included. But we also know that for significant numbers of adults and children in the UK, the pandemic has only served to intensify the digital divide that they already faced, and that has exacerbated existing inequalities. And the latest figures published yesterday from Ofcom, who's our telecoms regulator, shows that about 6% of UK homes, and that's around 1.5 million homes in total, have no internet access at all. And people in lower income homes and the most financially vulnerable are among those most likely to be offline. But as well as those 1.5 million homes with no internet access, many more millions of homes will have issues with getting good quality internet access and being able to afford to pay for it. So today we have a fantastic panel here to discuss the opportunities and challenges to close the UK's digital divide as a step towards greater inclusion. We'll hear from each of our panel members for about 10 minutes, and I have told them I'm going to try and be quite strict on time. I will try and do that, and hopefully we'll have a bit of time then left for questions at the end. And if you do have any questions for our panel members, please use the question and answer function, which you should be able to see at the bottom of the screen. And my colleague Julie will keep an eye on those questions, and we'll come to them once we've finished hearing from our great set of panel members. So I'm going to start off by asking Dr. Gemma Burgess to tell us a bit about an overview of digital exclusion. What is it, and why does it matter? Why should we be concerned about digital exclusion? And Gemma is the director of the Cambridge Centre for Housing and Planning Research at the University of Cambridge. So Gemma, please kick us off by telling us a bit about what digital exclusion is and why we should be concerned about it.
Well, thank you very much, and good morning, everybody. So, in my view, digital exclusion is a new form of social deprivation, exacerbated by and contributing to existing lines of inequality and poverty. And as the world gets smarter, the digital divide is getting wider. So what is digital exclusion? For me, the digital divide is the gap between those who have access to the latest technology and those who do not. And in an increasingly digital age, those who are not engaging effectively with the digital world are at risk of being left behind. So much of our day-to-day life requires digital connectivity. This includes many jobs in today's places of work. And the digital world is now a really important economic driver. We need digital connectivity to find information, access goods and services, and to connect with and communicate with others. However, what we are seeing is an increasing divide between those who have access to information and communications technology and those who do not, giving rise to inequalities in access to opportunities, knowledge, services, and goods. But access to the internet is one component of digital exclusion. This tends to be shaped by having sufficient income to access the internet, by the necessary equipment, by geography, as we know that network coverage, high-speed broadband can vary greatly depending on where you live, and there tends to be a rural-urban divide. And by IT literacy, knowing how to use technology. But rather than think of a binary digital divide, it is perhaps better to think about digital inclusion and exclusion, a spectrum of digital engagement from internet access to skills, to really being able to make use of online resources for beneficial outcomes. So it's more than just having internet access. The Department for Education produced guidance which states that there are 5 categories of essential digital skills for life and work. One is communicating, sending a message via email or online messaging services. The second is knowing how to handle information and content, knowing how to use a search engine to look for information, for example. The third is transacting, knowing how to buy items or services from a website, for example. The fourth is problem solving, being able to verify sources of information online or solve a problem using your device. And 5, running through all of that, is knowing how to be safe and legal online. So what's the scale of the problem and who does it affect? The important thing is that digital exclusion is not just a generational issue. Even before COVID, digital exclusion was a reality for about a fifth of the UK's population of all ages. In 2018, 8% of people in the UK, which is more than 4 million people, were estimated to have zero basic digital skills, being unable to do any of the above that I've just described. A further 12%, more than 6 million adults, were estimated to have only limited abilities online, so missing at least one of the basic digital skills. Although there is a decline in the number of people lacking digital skills over time, it's still estimated that about 8 million people will lack digital skills in 2025. And of the 8 million people or so who don't use the internet, 90% suffer from other kinds of economic or social disadvantage. They're more likely to be in the lowest income bracket and or to be disabled with long-standing health conditions. The likelihood of having access to internet from home increases along with income, such that only 51% of households earning between £6,000 and £10,000 a year have home internet access, compared to 99% of households with an income of over £40,000 a year. The link between digital exclusion and poverty is clear. If you are poor, you have less chance of being online. Now, 2 things have happened as the pandemic has taken hold. One is the increased pace of digitization, and the second is increased poverty and hardship. The pandemic and the subsequent lockdowns have shown that we are not all in the same boat. Households that were already struggling have been pushed deeper into poverty, and we've seen how health and housing inequalities make some people more vulnerable than others. A study of the impact of low-income households found that 8 in 10 respondents reported a significant deterioration in their living standards due to a combination of falling income and rising expenditure. And the pandemic has hugely increased the rate of digitization. Since the onset of social distancing and the lockdowns, some semblance of normality, or at least productivity, has been possible to maintain only because of the networks of digital technologies and platforms in place. Lockdown has served to highlight our reliance on virtual means of staying in touch. For many of us, the new norm means running a Zoom meeting from our makeshift home office in our kitchens. But increased working, learning, interacting online during the pandemic has widened the gap for those who lack digital skills or access. So for the fifth of the UK's population who lack digital skills or access to appropriate technology, this increased shift towards the digital world has excluded them yet further. So why does digital inequality matter? Internet use, digital connectivity now pervades every aspect of daily life. The Centre for Economics and Business Research identified 5 areas in which individuals who acquire basic digital skills are able to benefit and from which people on the wrong side of the digital divide are excluded. One is earnings benefits. These relate to increased earnings of between 3 and 10% through acquiring digital skills. The second is employability benefits. This reflects the improved chances of finding work for someone who is unemployed and the greater likelihood of searching for work. The third is retail transaction benefits. Shopping online has been found to be 13% cheaper on average than shopping in the stores. The fourth is communication benefits. Basic digital skills can enable people to connect, communicate with friends, family, the community 14% more frequently. And time savings. These relate to the time saved by accessing government services, banking online, rather than in person, about 30 minutes per transaction. In terms of earnings and employability benefits, the government's industrial strategy identified artificial intelligence and data as both an important challenge and an opportunity for creating good quality jobs and driving economic growth. In 2016, it was estimated that within the next 10 to 20 years, 90% of jobs will require some sort of digital skills. But this highlights that the digitally excluded will be increasingly at a disadvantage in the employment market. This echoes our own research. We're the research partner for the New Horizons programme, which provides one-to-one coaching designed to help individuals to manage their money, get closer to the job market, and overcome digital exclusion across the east of England. And the research has found that increasing people's digital skills plays a role in getting them back on track. Our interviews identified several benefits from being online, searching for better deals, managing finances by online banking, easier access to job searching, communicating, and confidence boosts as a result of developing their digital capabilities. Now, Polly's case from our interviews is indicative of the heightened importance which digital means of communication have taken on in the last year as a result of the coronavirus lockdown and social distancing. For those who have access to the internet at home, digital skills can provide an essential lifeline. So to end with a quote from an interview, the internet is a lifeline for me because I used to drink at the drop of a hat, and to go back to that, so I'm abstinent. But to go back to that, I would die. I've been suicidal. So putting a person that has mental health issues like myself into a disconnected state, it really trips me out. So definitely, my ability to feel a certain confidence of using a computer. Yes, I absolutely had to learn to use the internet. And that's indicative of the narratives that we've heard from people over the last year. So as I said at the beginning, digital exclusion is a new form of social deprivation, exacerbated by existing lines of inequality and poverty. As the world gets smarter, that divide gets wider. What does it mean to live in a smart city like Cambridge if you are digitally excluded? How do you benefit from the Internet of Things if you cannot afford access to the Internet? And so as we build back better and we build digital, we have an opportunity to take account of the unintended consequences of digitalization and to tackle it now before it becomes an entrenched part of the already unequal social fabric of the UK. The pandemic has changed the way that we interact. It looks set to have a lasting effect on the way that we communicate. By putting improving digital skills at the heart of the post-COVID recovery plans in the UK, we have the opportunity to not only boost national productivity, but to improve the lives of millions of households at risk of being left behind in a digital world. So by tackling the inequality in digital capabilities, we are future-proofing our national skill set and creating resilience against poverty, exclusion, and the impact of future pandemics. Thank you very much, Sharon. Back to you.
Thanks very much, Gemma. Goodness, that was a real tour de force, and what a way to set us off in the session. That was brilliant. Thank you so much. A lot to think about there. The complexity, I think, of digital exclusion and the importance of understanding as a spectrum. That was brilliant. Thank you very much. I'm going to turn now to two colleagues, Katie Goldstraw and Corinna Eastwood, who are both members of the Apple Collective. Corinna's also a member of the of Thrive Teesside. So Katie, I think we're coming to you first. And what we wanted to hear from yourself and Coy was just around the lived experience of being digitally excluded during the pandemic.
Thank you. Coy's actually going to speak first, so I'll let her speak and then she's going to come across to me.
Thanks very much. Sorry, Coy. You're on mute, I think, Coy.
Sorry. Corinna Eastwood from Thrive Teesside. We're an anti-poverty charity based in Stockton, part of the Apple Collective, which is addressing poverty with lived experience. So we began in 2018 with 4 founding member organisations, and all those who have lived experience of poverty or work with those that do within their communities. Our first focus was around the International Day for the Eradication of Poverty on October 17th, which was to amplify those voices. And we did this through lighting up the UK map and sharing their personal experiences and solutions to poverty, and have had 2 successful campaigns. We began to grow the membership, and we've got now 11 active organisations who are all led by lived experience. And that's when it became clear that not everyone was able to participate digitally. So whether it was not having access to the internet or the IT skills to enable them to fully participate in not only some of the obvious things like homeschooling, online shopping, filling in out e-consult forms for the doctors, but to continue to be heard and be an active member of society. Because our expertise and insight are essential when decisions are made that affect our lives. People who've got lived experience of poverty can pave the way for a more personal and human approach to anti-poverty policy and practice. So in a recent webinar, we spoke about whose responsibility was it to keep people digitally connected, because for a modern society to function effectively, the recognition of digital connectivity needed to be seen as an indispensable as fuel or water. It needs to be considered as a utility, as it's now an essential service, because being digitally connected can't be just seen as a luxury. Digital access must be seen as a need to have and not a nice to have by central and local government bodies when thinking about our poorest communities. And social housing providers should have some responsibility to keep people connected, as it would be in their interest with people's rent accounts or repairs, or just their responsibility of community engagement. And we also think that the DWP has a responsibility to keep claimants online to access their universal credit journals and look for jobs. So one of our members, the Good Things Foundation, said that 23% of children in the poorest families don't have access to broadband, a laptop or desktop or a tablet. And we know this was the case before the pandemic, but only now has it had more attention, as people need to be digitally connected more than ever. And as you said earlier, from Ofcom, that there's still 1.5 million homes that remain offline. And we do welcome the positive and compassionate moves made by the government and the telecommunications industry to seek and buffer the effects of COVID-19 on those on low incomes. But what's little mentioned so far are the voices and the responses by those who are completely excluded from the digital world. I'll just hand over to Katie just to talk a bit more about what we've done, our campaign and the digital divide.
Thanks, Kai. So I'm going to tell you very briefly what we've been doing. So in March 2020, like the rest of the world, we moved immediately online from our usual face-to-face meetings in community centres. We very quickly realised that actually there's a huge inequality, even amongst our members, in terms of what technology we had. The news this morning has said that there's still 1.5 million of us excluded from digital access. But actually, it's a lot more complicated than that, and the lived experience is a lot more complicated. As Gemma kind of summarised in her opening speech, that accessibility, there's an inequality of accessibility. So if you're on your telephone trying to homeschool on a smartphone, is really difficult. If you're trying to join a Zoom call via a smartphone, it's really difficult. For the Apple Collective, digital exclusion isn't just about not being able to access your doctor's appointment, not being able to get on your online shopping. It's more fundamental than that, and it's about not having a voice, not being able to participate within our democracy. So that's where we came from in terms of our campaigning. It was about us having a voice. I've put up in the chat there a link to our website, and you can read our blogs, because we started really, really quickly in March 2020, blogging about the digital divide and that lived experience of the digital divide. Those blogs were picked up by The Guardian and the BBC. And from those blogs, we've held webinars and gatherings of other lived experience groups to look at solutions. And the way that we're looking at solutions is that we've written to Oliver Dowden at DCMS, and we've written to the nine Metro mayors, and we've written to 13 members of Parliament that are represented within our Apple Collective member group. And we've had 4 meetings with interested MPs within that group. From all of our campaigning work, we've created a briefing paper that summarises our knowledge of the lived experience of the digital divide, which is available on our website. We're running Apple Month in June to share and amplify the voices of lived experience, because actually a policy created in Westminster doesn't necessarily represent or meet the needs of people with lived experience of low income. Our knowledge is what can actually form how a policy feels and change how a policy is developed on the basis of that expertise by lived experience. We've got an Apple Month coming up in June, where we're going to be be sharing those lived experiences and that expertise by experience. We've also got a book that we're publishing in June called Socially Distanced Activism with Policy Press, again talking about the value of our knowledge through lived experience and talking about our digital campaigning. We were fortunate enough to win the Digital Campaigning Group of the Year award by the UK Parliament Awards in 2021, and we're really proud that that represents our kind of hard work getting our voice and our knowledge out there. The lived experience of the digital divide is not being able to have a voice, is not being able to be heard, is very fundamentally about not being able to access our basic human rights, get online for shopping, access our medical appointments, being able to homeschool. It's about actually making or being able to be less safe online because people haven't necessarily got all of the digital literacy skills to keep themselves safe online. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Katie and Coy. That was really a great introduction to the work of the Apple Collective, which has been doing such fantastic work. And then just to hear something about that lived experience, I think, which as you've articulated so well, is complex and actually spans all parts of people's lives and affects their participation and as you say, their ability to have a voice in society. So thank you for that. I have to thank my panelists because you're all doing marvelously in terms of time management. So I'm really, really impressed. Thank you. And hopefully that gives us more time for a conversation towards the end. But next up, I'm going to turn to our third speaker this morning. And I'm really delighted to introduce Seema Malhotra, who's the Labour MP for Felton and Heston. And she's also the Shadow Work and Pensions Minister and a member of the Social Integration All-Party Parliamentary Group, which is a cross-party parliamentary group looking at social integration and amongst that the impact of digital exclusion. So Seema, it's great to have you here with us. I wondered if you could perhaps tell us a little bit from your experience what you think the policy priorities should be to help deliver digital inclusion across the UK.
Well, thank you very much, Sharon, and thank you and Julie and the University of Bristol for holding this really important conference. And it's great to be engaging with the Personal Finance Research Centre as well. I mean, there's extraordinary work that you do that's certainly informing a lot of our policy thinking as we look to how we need to integrate policy around tackling poverty, but also now I think the digital exclusion question. I was really interested to hear from Gemma, Katie and Corinna as well, because I agree that digital exclusion is a new form of social deprivation. I think it's a really powerful way to express what is happening and how we're seeing the rise of the new have-nots. In a sense, the sort of criticality of that has been demonstrated through the pandemic, and it being around those points that have been discussed, the issues of income, of work, of being able to engage in society, and really this link, I think this link that we need to find ways to break between low income and digital access. I think this is important and it really does matter. It's one of the reasons why I'm working with my colleague Chion Wura, who is the Shadow DC Minister, with whom I work on digital exclusion issues. She and I have discussed the points around whether or not going online should be a right, and if you had something like that, and discussing some of these policy options, how you have a meaningful universal service obligation. So building on some of the foundation stones that we've seen move in terms of policy over the last few years, but move them on even further, because the USO that has been around, possibly a right to a certain speed of access, because it isn't just about access, it's also about the speed and what you can do with that, with programs and even on data heavy sort of websites, that you can actually not have productive access to sites if you don't have enough bandwidth. So we think of this in terms of computers, but there's also the connectivity that's a very, very significant policy issue. I do want to also address in my remarks some thoughts about how we need to focus on building an inclusive intergenerational recovery, because the next phase of thinking around COVID and the pandemic is going to be how we're building that recovery, building back better, building back greener. And we talk about this in terms of access to jobs. We talk about this in terms of how the pandemic has really accelerated services and products going online, but also it's accelerated how companies are starting to change how their workforce is going to be structured. Just this morning, I had a very interesting conversation with Zurich about how they've already started building, they've developed an academy that's looking at how digital skills are going to be important for all areas of their work, and stepping in now to have an upskilling program for 3/4 of their employees in order that those people are still competitive for those jobs in the future. And my worry is that the digital divide is going to lead to a worklessness crisis, with those who don't have digital skills being pushed out of workplaces as those who have digital skills then become much more marketable for where the jobs of the future are likely to be. And we've had some comment around the sort of 90% of jobs are likely to, in the future, to need some form of digital skill. So the policy significance is around that connectivity, it's around employment, it is around skills development, and needing an active programme led by government for the scale of the challenge to ensure that we've got digital inclusion and not digital exclusion. It is the case that things have moved on. We know that it was just 2 years ago, the ONS found that 10% of adults had not used the internet in 3 months. Now this has moved on, and what's been interesting is the new research from Ofcom that's saying the proportion of homes without internet access has fallen from 11% a year ago to 6% last month. But despite that growing access to the internet, Ofcom's research has found that 6% of homes without internet access are now relatively more disempowered due to the lockdown. There was also a commentary about how nearly all school-aged children are getting access to the internet for homeschooling, but 1 in 5 don't have a consistent access to a device to carry out home learning. It's one of the reasons why I'm very worried about catch-up as much as access to the access to schools now. We cannot for a moment rest our laurels and think that the issue of digital inclusion at school level is over because schools are back. There's a massive job to do in catch-up. There's going to be 2 or 3 years of children who, year groups of children who haven't had proper access in their sort of exam years, who are going to be behind at the next stage of their learning unless they have the means to catch up. And so when you're at home using a phone that one of your parents may have, or you're in a single parent household and you've got siblings trying to study and you've got a parent trying to work, this is an issue we have not got to the bottom of. And it's one of the reasons why the programme that we set up through a charity that we have in Hounslow, Hounslows Promise, which is to supporting education, attainment and employability of young people. A year ago, we started a programme for community donations of laptops and iPads to help children be able to study at home. We've had hundreds of laptops reaching schools and then children in need through that process, making a dramatic improvement from next to no engagement with online learning and the online school classroom to medium and high engagement very quickly. But alongside that, the digital skills aspect has had to be sustained. It's also important to look at how the digital divide is a form of inequality that is exacerbating other inequalities. We had some mention of this, and that's with those with a registered disability, more than 4 times as likely to have lack of basic digital skills. Those over 60, men in the highest social groups are 20% more likely than women in lower social grades to have access. So in terms of what we need to do about it, we do need to have a policy of solution that is rooted in how we ensure that people have the technology to be able to connect to the digital world, and that's both the hardware and the connectivity. We need to ensure, as I think Gemma very helpfully outlined as well and very powerfully, to empower people to have those basic digital skills needed to fully benefit from technology. And those basic digital skills that the tech partnership has outlined, that framework that Gemma also talked about, is vital. Based on that framework, around 8% of people in the UK were estimated to have zero basic digital skills, and around 12% estimated to miss out on one of those basic digital skills. So when it comes to being able to manage your money, being able to get a job, being able to get access to the best deals and therefore make the most of the money you have, the inequalities become compounded without that lack of lack of access. So that's why it's right to be starting to think about this new USO, Universal Service Obligation. I think it's important to think about how every area of government policy is meeting the test of digital inclusion. And I would want to see that we've got government departments doing that, whether it is on employability and employment, whether it's on education, whether it's on community engagement and access to community services. I'm seeing so much in my constituency of those who are left behind. Somali mums is one example, who end up giving their passwords to people because they haven't been able to access their bank accounts or their universal credit logs, and to do so meaningfully. And when you think about the risk to those who are digitally excluded, who are forced to be depending on each other, on others, hopefully those they can trust, but they can be very vulnerable to those who could take advantage. It becomes a real issue for online safety, and also safety for access to personal income and other services. So I'll close by just saying that the digital divide is going to continue. There will always be a number of people who refuse to connect to the digital world, and we have to have a solution of inclusion for those, for whatever reason that money and upskilling won't solve. But we've got to ensure that government has a coherent strategy, that it is focused on inclusion for those, at the very sort of most needy and most vulnerable, and that we have a way in which we're thinking about this across departments, so that inclusion is starting to be seen as a right, and it is part of an integrated social strategy and government strategy.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Seema. A huge amount for us to think about there, I think. And I really like the idea of a universal service obligation, which provides people with the access that they need. So thank you for that. I'm going to move on now to bring in Emma Stone from Good Things Foundation. And Emma is the Director of Design and Research at Good Things Foundation. And what the foundation does is work to enable people to be digitally able, active and equal. So touching upon many of the things that that our panel members have raised today. And Emma, I just wanted to come to you to tell us a bit about what practical things are shown to be effective at closing the digital divide, and what sorts of things should we be looking at, as Seema mentioned, as we need to make sure that everybody is connected, what sorts of initiatives and schemes might help to achieve that?
Yeah. Brilliant. Thanks, Sharon, and thanks everyone. It's been really brilliant hearing everyone's contributions. And I suppose for me, I just want to kind of recap a little bit around what we're talking about, the links with poverty. I think, as everyone has mentioned, we can see that one of the biggest root causes of the digital divide across all ages is poverty, is having a low income. But we're also seeing more and more about how wherever you're at on that spectrum of digital exclusion, that is also going to deepen your experience of poverty and is widening inequality. And we're seeing that also in other areas. So not only income inequalities, but also around health inequalities, for example. So this is absolutely something that is so core to what we need to address, not only now, but for our future, thinking about our financial well-being, thinking about our social well-being, thinking about our health as well. And the other thing that's really been well illustrated is this point that we're kind of beyond, you know, there is a clear issue around having internet access and not having internet access. But when we're talking about digital exclusion and inclusion, it really is a spectrum. So you might have even a smartphone, but that doesn't mean to say you can afford to access data all the time. And even if you can afford to access data all the time, you might not have the skills or confidence or support to be able to fully benefit from the device and the data you have. So I think that's really important. I work for a charity called Good Things Foundation. We've actually been working in this area of digital inclusion for over 10 years now. And at the heart of our approach is actually, this is about people and it's about communities. We're not techie, we're not kind of, you know, data digital experts. This is all about how we can enable people to get online, to build their skills and confidence, to be able to use it so they can be happier and healthier and better off. And so that means that a big part of how we work, and therefore a big part of how we see some of the solutions happening here, is we support a network of independent, really diverse organisations across the country. So they might be libraries, social enterprises, really tiny training providers, or really well-established local branches of a national organisation. And what they have in common is they want to find ways to respond to local community needs to get online or build digital inclusion and confidence. And that network is called the Online Centres Network. And so we try and provide support to enable them to respond to local need. And increasingly as well, that's not only about how you can help people to get online, but it's then actually around how we're helping to build digital skills and confidence to use, for example, online health tools, or to be able to kind of do essentials like accessing universal credit, for example. It's not for its own sake. This is always about how people can use digital to improve their lives and to access the essential support. And as Coy and Katie were talking about, it's also about civic and democratic participation as well. So in terms of practical solutions, I just wanted to highlight a few examples from our own experience. So a key one is around digital skills development. There has been more work going on around this. One of the things that we're really worried about, though, is that some of the current government interventions, for example, digital boot camps, they're actually starting on the assumption that people are already quite a few steps up a ladder of digital inclusion. And there is an excellent essential digital skills entitlement, but again, there's a worry that the devolution, that with adult education budgets being devolved to local authorities, to combined authorities, there's a risk that actually there won't be enough support going into what we call a community digital inclusion pathway. So thinking about the Somali mums that Seema was mentioning there, the level of confidence it can take to go, yes, I'll sign up to a course at a further education college, compared to being able to access friendly, informal learning around digital skills in a local community centre where you see yourself really reflected. That's the sort of difference we're talking about. And so we talk a lot about the need for that, really a national network of local community organisations which are, which have trusted, friendly people there to support you, and they're really accessible for you. And I think getting that right enables people to then go on to access further support around, for example, the digital skills they might need for work, to be able to secure work, as Seema was highlighting. So that's one area. Another area we've been really active on since the start of the pandemic is around the distribution of devices along with data connectivity and along with digital skills support. And that's not something that we did anything on until the pandemic started, because effectively when the pandemic started, that network that I was just talking about, so many of them had to shut down. They couldn't provide that face-to-face support. These were places where people were able to access the internet if they didn't have it at home, or use public Wi-Fi. And so when that safety net was pulled away, we realized we needed to play a role in working through that network to distribute devices out to people. And in the main, that has come through support from corporates and public donations and charitable donations. Recently, DCMS has given us some funding to enable us to distribute devices to 5,000 people with learning disabilities in England. So that's been brilliant. But all of this actually feels very small still compared to, for example, what the Scottish government has done as part of their Connecting Scotland agenda, which has had a lot more public money put behind it. And I wanted to mention that as another reminder of the policy solutions as well as practical solutions being different across different parts of the UK as well. A third area I wanted to give an example of is something that we've been doing around how to join the dots between digital inclusion support and financial inclusion support. And focusing that on people who are struggling on low incomes. And actually this is where we first really started connecting with Apple Collective as part of a Nobody in the Dark coalition, with support from MasterCard as well, and Joseph Rowntree Foundation, and working in partnership with financial inclusion experts, Clean Slate. And why I wanted to mention this is I think one of the other practical challenges is that as digital inclusion becomes more and more important across lots of areas of our lives, what we're realizing is that actually there isn't necessarily the capability in communities or from provider organizations to be able to support people to build their digital skills and confidence in using those online tools. So for example, the shift and acceleration of digital health has highlighted that actually there are care workers, there are health workers and health professionals who themselves lack digital skills and capability, as well as being uncertain about how they can support patients or carers or citizens or consumers to be able to access access those tools. And we see that a lot in terms of kind of financial and money support and guidance as well. And so what we've wanted to do is think, well, how do we bring those together? Instead of thinking, okay, you go over here to get your digital skills support and you go over here to get money guidance or financial capability support, how do we work to bring those together? And so that's something we've been working on for the last year, and we're really excited we've been able to get a bit more funding to keep on doing that. And it's through things like that that we help people to overcome some of those aspects of the online poverty premium that Gemma was also talking about. And a fourth area that I wanted to highlight is something we've recently started doing, and we're really pleased that we'll be working with Apple Collective on this as well, to make sure that the experience of people with lived experience is right at the heart of this. But it's called a data poverty lab, which sounds very highfalutin, but it was an idea that we put forward last September as part of our blueprint. And we hoped that government might pick it up and run with it. Government didn't, but Nominet did, and they've given us some funding. And really it's about going, we've seen incredible emergency responses this last year, actions from some of the telecommunications providers, what local businesses have been doing, what other organisations and communities have themselves been doing to try and address this issue of data poverty. But how do we move from these emergency responses to find more sustainable solutions? And what's the best way of doing that? Is it about that kind of universal service obligation? Is it recognising digital as an internet access as an essential utility? Is it around data donating or social prescribing data connectivity? Where can we get to on social tariffs and more zero rating of websites? All of these are different solutions. They all need to be in the mix. There's never a single solution to a challenge like data poverty. But I'm really clear that data poverty is entirely a man-made problem, and therefore it is something that we do need to find ways to solve, and we need to find ways to solve that together. I suppose my last three takeaways are to conclude. I think at the moment, in terms of practical solutions and policy solutions, there is this risk that as we move out of the pandemic, the attention and the focus on digital exclusion starts to fall away, where actually what we need to be doing is moving from an emergency response into something that is much more strategic. I loved what Seema said about how we integrate this as part of a social and government and economic strategy really for the nation. But also there's a risk that we see this just as government's problem, whereas actually this is also for housing associations to address, for local government to address as well, GP practices, businesses, and this is something that is across government departments. I think Coy mentioned the increased responsibility she'd want to see the DWP taking on this, which I really agree with. It has to cover across those government departments. There's a lot that we know how to do already, but it needs investment, and a lot of that investment needs to go into community organisations who are best placed to enable people to get online and build their confidence to benefit and to use the internet safely. So I'll stop there, but thank you very much. Back to you, Sharon.
Thanks very much, Emma, and thanks all of the panel members today. I hope you agree that's been a magnificent exploration of some of the issues and the challenges, but also the opportunities that exist. And I think Emma's final comments there bring me to think about, it's really important in policy or in practice or indeed in research to start where people are. So, making assumptions about where people are in their digital journey is quite dangerous, because it assumes knowledge and skills that people don't necessarily have because they've not been able to develop them. So it's a huge amount for us to think about. Thank you so much. I just wondered if I could ask the panel members to put their cameras on just for the Q&A session. That would be lovely. Thank you, so we can see you all. I might hand over to Julie now, if that's okay. Julie was going to take us through some questions. I know we've had a couple in the chat, and we may also have some questions that we want to ask each other, I imagine. Thanks, Julie.
Yeah, thanks, Sharon, and thanks everyone for such rich and engaging talks. As Sharon said, we've had a couple of questions that have come through on the chat, which I think if we take all together, and then I can kind of come to each of you in turn for responses. I think the sort of questions and comments that have come through fall into three broad areas. So the first one is really around the evolution and determinants of digital access and affordability. And I know there's been one written response to this in the chat from Katie, but we have a comment that says, it seems that we see a correlation between digital exclusion and other forms of disadvantage. So how complex is the causation picture here? So that's essentially question number one. The second question really is around variations in use. So kind of what's been hidden by some of these headline figures that we've seen in the press this morning, around kind of who has access, who has online access. I know some of the talks have talked, Seema talked about the kind of gender differences that we might see in how people use the internet and how people access the digital world. So this comment says, is picking up on the comment or the statistic, 10% of adults hadn't used the internet in 3 months. The language here might be glossing over a lot of things. How effectively do they use it? How confidently? How safely? So a question there about kind of variations in use. And I think that leads us really to what's come through in some of the talks around kind of responses and I guess responsibilities. And this comment from Dave Donaghy saying, Dan Brown from PTG has focused a lot on this recently. We cannot lose the opportunity that we now have. With added visibility of the issue due to lockdown, once we start getting back to normal, we must instead make sure, now that we have such increased awareness of the issue, that we follow through on our efforts to fix things and to keep them fixed. And I think this is really interesting because what I can see is sort of different layers of response. So on the one hand, the kind of the need for investment in kind of infrastructural investment. I know that within the 2019 manifesto from the Labour Party, there was this proposal for investing in superfast broadband that would be free at point of use. And Seema's talked within her slot this morning around various programs, kind of active programs that look at the need for investing in kind of individual skills. We've heard from Katie, Karina, from Emma around kind of what maybe community organisations can do, and what I guess what the kind of third sector might do as well to support people getting online, to kind of skill them. And I guess I kind of have a question here really about maybe some of the emphasis and language around this, and about where responsibility is seen to lie. Is it seen to lie with the individual for being excluded? Is there a danger in some of that language around kind of framing this as an individual problem rather than maybe something that's wider, more structural, which kind of takes us back to that first comment about the potential overlap between who is being digitally excluded and these longer standing patterns of inequality and exclusion. So a lot there, but I think three different aspects to the questions and comments that have come through. So I don't know how best to do this, whether it's best to go, well, I don't know whether anyone wants to come in first, or whether I can just go around in turn in the order that we had the talks.
I'm happy to kick off.
Okay, thanks, Emma.
Julie, if you want. So I'm going to keep this brief because I could absolutely rant forever about the fact that actually, in terms of the responses to some of the questions around causation and complexity and variations in use and intersectionality, it points to the fact that yes, it's great we've got the Ofcom data out now, but actually the data that we've got on digital exclusion and how it links to other forms of social and economic exclusion is not great. So we've got Ofcom data which absolutely gives us clear correlations in a number of areas. But for example, the sample is, it might have been improved this year, but historically the sample has been too low, for example, in terms of being able to disaggregate and understand the intersectionality with ethnicity and income and age. So I think there's still a challenge there, which means that we know a lot from our experience through community partners about how these intersect, but it can be quite difficult to get really robust data. Another really good example is I fed back to ONS, who are currently looking to pull together a health data index to understand about healthy lives and health inequalities, thinking about that at a community level as well as at an individual level. There is no single indicator in there around digital access and inclusion because ONS concluded that there wasn't one that would be good enough to show at a granular level where people were at in terms of digital inclusion. It's not that they didn't want it, because they recognise that digitalisation is a huge part of health access and also health inequalities now, but there wasn't a good enough data set, even from their own ONS data or Ofcom data. And actually one of the best sources we have is thanks to a corporate, is thanks to Lloyds Banking Group, and their Consumer Digital Index will be out at the end of this year. So we do know a lot in terms of the overlaps, and therefore we can talk confidently about the higher risk in relation to things like low income and age and disability and health conditions, but that's still not going to be giving us the sort of accurate, granular detail that, for example, local governments, housing associations, third sectors might be able to use to better target their efforts. So that links in a way to the point that was being asked about, responsibility and how even those who want to take responsibility can be held back. For third sector organisations, join our network of online centres. Let's help to expand and develop that network. I think there are two other things I wanted to say is, as well as not knowing enough about the causation side, in terms of the solutions, one of the things we're really interested in is how can we establish a clearer benchmark of what is it that households need to live well and safely in a digital world. There's been a lot of debate around like how much data connectivity, how many devices does a family need, and there's a bit of a risk that we will get stuck in terms of developing solutions through arguments around kind of those sorts of issues. So one of the things that we've suggested along with Carnegie UK Trust and others is actually we need to have a better benchmark, a kind of minimum digital living standard, as it were, which is about the goods and services, but also the capabilities that different household types need. And I think it was a really great question around the agency and structure. But I think this is one area where absolutely there are structural causes here, and absolutely some of the solutions are structural, because when we're talking about poverty, that's so important. But let's not take away from the importance of individual agency and self-empowerment here, and actually the choice and the motivation that people have to kind of go online as well. So I don't think it's an either or, I think it's a both and.
Thanks so much, Emma. Did any of the other panelists want to come in?
I was just going to say, for me, on a community level, and working in a deprived area, the feedback from our community does go back to those services that people need to access. If funding's cut from libraries, community hubs, things like that, then it's more likely that people who are already facing social economic disadvantage or poverty are the ones who are accessing those services. They rely on them so much, and if that funding's cut, then sometimes, and as a charity, it does come back to us. We're an anti-poverty charity. We deal with crisis quite a lot on a daily basis, and sometimes we haven't got the capacity to, we're supporting people with the universal credit journals or anything, to filling out forms, and there's just not them spaces anymore. And I think it needs to go back to that old school community collaboration of just supporting each other. That's the feedback from our community. Thanks
so much, Corey. So I'm aware we've got about 3 minutes, so I'm just going to offer Gemma and Seema, and I don't know if Katie has anything that she wants to add to what Karina's already said, but just a final word if you wanted.
I'll make just a final quick comment if that's helpful. I just want to refocus us back on the one point that I made, which is around inclusive intergenerational recovery, because we've got some choices now about how we're going to change things coming out of the pandemic. There's an opportunity before a new sort of mode gets set, and those who are the sort of, the emergent winners continue to sort of, set the direction of travel their way. I think the point that was made about the variability is the key thing to also keep a focus on, and how we're going to ensure there's inclusion, and that we don't have, that 6%, and then the greater percentages of those who, I think a very strong point, not just about access, but effectively, how are they accessing, and is what's the quality of that interaction, and being able to go to libraries, etc., is vital. But we all spend hours on the internet. We learn so much, we read so much, we browse so much, we build our skills, and an hour every few days is not going to get people to that level. So we've got to think about what's the capability that we want people to reach, as well as what's the basic level. And just one very final point on whose responsibility is it. I think we're going to see, I hope, public policy debate move towards seeing this structural issue as a national responsibility, and needing a proper programme as to how we're going to deal with it and with market failures in this area.
Thank you, Seema. And Gemma, I don't know if you want to have the final word.
I'm very conscious of time. My only final word would be to say, what we do have is a voice. We have an emerging evidence base, I mean, look at the group that's come together today. We have academics, we have the voluntary sector, you know, we have an MP on the call, we've got the voice of lived experience. What we do have is the opportunity to create a coalition to demand change in this area and to come together. And I think, you know, bringing us together has been a great opportunity to develop that. So that's what I would end on, and thank you all very much.
Yeah, thanks ever so much, Gemma. That's a fantastic way to end what's been a really great hour. And I guess it's just falls to me just to thank once again all of our panelists and to the audience for their participation via the Q&A. Thank you.